Do you believe in curses? Not the kind whispered in hushed tones around campfires, but the ones that seep into the very stone of a place, tainting generations with an indelible stain. For centuries, the small forgotten town of Blackwood Dell, nestled deep within the craggy embrace of the Scottish Highlands, has been haunted by a legend as dark as the peat bogs surrounding it. A legend, or perhaps a meticulously concealed truth, that began with the chilling disappearance of the first bride from St. Helena Church, and then the second, and the third, until, over nearly 200 years, the number swelled to a horrifying, unbelievable 28. 28 young women, vibrant with hope and the blush of new love, who walked into the hallowed halls of St. Helena as brides and simply vanished. For those of us who delve into the annals of forgotten histories, who pick at the scabs of time to unearth the festering wounds beneath, Blackwood Dell is a goldmine, a graveyard of untold stories. My name is Dr. Elias Thorne, and for the past 5 years, the enigma of St. Helena Church has consumed my every waking thought. I've sifted through crumbling parish registers, deciphered cryptic marginalia in antique Bibles, and interviewed the descendants of terrified villagers, whose ancestors witnessed the first whispered fears morph into outright terror. What began as an academic curiosity, a macabre footnote in the history of Scottish folklore, has transformed into an obsession, a gnawing conviction that behind the veil of the curse lies something far more sinister, far more human. The official records, sparse and often contradictory, speak of inexplicable vanishing acts, of distraught grooms and bewildered families. The common thread, the one detail that chills to the bone, is that every single disappearance occurred on the wedding night, within hours of the ceremony, concluding at St. Helena, not outside the church, not on the journey home, but after the final blessing, after the vows were exchanged, and before the dawn broke on their marital bliss. It was as if the very stones of St. Helena swallowed them whole. My initial investigations began in the musty archives of the Edinburgh Historical Society, where I stumbled upon a collection of fragmented newspaper clippings from the late 18th and early 19th centuries. They were sensationalist, even for their time, detailing the Blackwood Dell blight and the brides of St. Helena. One particular article, dated 1793, from the Caledonian Mercury, screamed the headline, "Seventh Bride Vanishes. Local Superstition Blames Ancient Curse." The accompanying report, however, was light on facts and heavy on local gossip, attributing the disappearances to a malevolent spirit, angered by a desecration long forgotten. Typical sensationalism, I thought at the time, but the consistent pattern of these vanishings, spanning generations, hinted at something far more organized and premeditated than a mere specter. The first documented disappearance, according to local parish records, was that of Elara MacLeod on the eve of St. Valentine's Day, 1789. She was barely 18, a raven-haired lass known for her spirited laugh and a smile that could melt the winter frost. Her groom, a strapping young farmer named Lachlan, was found the next morning in the church vestry, catatonic with grief and terror, muttering about shadows that moved like hungry ghosts and a silence that stole the air. He never fully recovered, spending his remaining years a hollow shell, staring out at the moors, forever lost in the echoes of a joy that was brutally snatched away. I traveled to Blackwood Dell Place. Time seemed to have forgotten. The air itself felt heavy, thick with unspoken narratives. The church, St. Helena, stood on a desolate knoll, its gray stone edifice gaunt against the perpetually overcast sky. Its stained glass windows, once vibrant, were now shattered or boarded up like blind, weeping eyes. The graveyard surrounding it was a tangle of overgrown weeds and leaning, moss-covered headstones, many bearing dates from the very period the disappearances began. My first port of call was the dilapidated rectory, now inhabited by a distant relative of the last resident priest, an elderly stoic woman named Agnes McPherson. She initially greeted me with suspicion, her eyes, the color of faded denim, assessing me with an unnerving intensity. "Another one come to poke at old wounds, eh?" she rasped, her voice like gravel. I explained my academic intentions, my desire to document the local history, carefully omitting my deeper suspicions. Slowly, meticulously, I began to earn her grudging trust. Agnes, it turned out, was a reluctant keeper of Blackwood Dell's true history, not the romanticized version spun for tourists, but the raw, unvarnished truth passed down through generations. She spoke of how the curse became so ingrained that young women, despite their love, began to fear St. Helena. Weddings became hushed, hurried affairs, often followed by a frantic rush to leave the church grounds before darkness fell. Yet, the disappearances continued, undeterred by precautions. "They say it was the old ways," Agnes mumbled one evening, stirring her weak tea by the dying embers of her hearth. "That the church was built on unholy ground, or that the devil himself claimed them as a tithe." She paused, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "But my great-grandmother, she always said it wasn't no devil. She said it was men, greedy men, with black hearts and darker secrets." This resonated with my own growing conviction. A curse was too convenient, too neat. 28 women, all gone without a trace, pointed to a meticulously orchestrated campaign. But what was the motive, and how was it executed? Time and again, in a small, isolated community where secrets were impossible to keep, or so one would think. I asked Agnes if she had any family records, any personal accounts, anything that might shed light beyond the official, sanitized versions. She was reluctant at first, citing family honor and not disturbing the dead. But after days of patient conversation, of sharing my own theories about how history can be weaponized as folklore, she finally relented. "There's an old trunk in the attic," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Belonged to my great-great-aunt Morag. She was a scholar, for her time, kept everything, journals, letters, even some of her own theories about St. Helena. My grandmother sealed it away after Morag. After she stopped speaking of it, my heart quickened. This was it. This was the crack in the facade, the opening into the concealed narrative. I envisioned dusty, forgotten pages, ink faded, but stories preserved. This was the tangible link I had been searching for. Something beyond academic conjecture. The attic was cold, musty, and filled with the ghosts of forgotten belongings. In a far corner, beneath a shroud of cobwebs, sat a large, iron-bound wooden trunk. Its lock was rusted shut, but a determined yank broke the ancient clasp. Inside, wrapped in yellowed linen, lay a stack of leather-bound journals, their pages brittle with age, the air filled with the scent of aged paper and dried lavender. The first journal, open to a random page, revealed an elegant, if somewhat spidery script. The date at the top of the page was 1795. My eyes scanned the words, a knot forming in my stomach. The fear now grips us all. Another, young Isabella of the Glen, taken on her night of joy. The villagers speak of the curse with conviction, but I, Morag McPherson, fear a different kind of darkness. A human darkness. For I saw something, a glint in the shadow, a flicker of movement where no shadow should be, just as the chapel doors closed on her final moments of freedom. The words sent a shiver down my spine, not of supernatural dread, but of cold, human terror. Morag, it seemed, was not content with the easy explanation of a curse. She was an investigator herself, centuries before my time. Her journals promised to be the key, the true chronicle of what transpired within the walls of St. Helena Church. And as I turned the fragile page, a loose, folded sheet of parchment slipped from between the leaves, adorned with a crudely drawn, yet disturbingly familiar symbol. A symbol I had seen before, not in Blackwood Dell, but in the archives of secret societies and forgotten cults. My hand trembled as I picked it up, the implications chilling me to the bone. This wasn't just a local tragedy. This was a darkness, with far-reaching tendrils, a conspiracy hidden beneath the guise of a centuries-old curse. What could this symbol possibly mean, and how many more secrets lay buried within Morag's meticulous observations? The truth, it seemed, was far more disturbing than any curse. The symbol on the parchment, a crude yet distinct etching of a serpent devouring its own tail within a fractured circle, felt like a cold whisper from the past, a silent accusation. It was the Ouroboros, an ancient emblem of cyclicality and eternity, but here, subtly distorted, broken. I'd encountered variations of it in my research into obscure Scottish cults and secret societies, groups that often mingled esoteric mysticism with more earthly, often sinister, pursuits. How could such a symbol be connected to the vanishings in a remote Highland village? My mind raced, connecting the dots that Morag Macpherson, it seemed, had also begun to trace centuries ago. This was no mere local superstition, no simple curse. This was a thread leading into a much larger, more terrifying tapestry. Morag. She was an unusual woman for her time, Agnes said, her voice pulling me back from the precipice of my thoughts. She watched me, her faded eyes keen, as if sensing the weight of the parchment in my hand. Always reading, always asking questions. The menfolk didn't like it, said she had too much of the devil's curiosity in her. She paused, then added, "It was after she stopped asking questions that the fear truly set in, I think, when she knew too much to speak, but not enough to fight." Her words sent a fresh wave of unease through me. What had Morag discovered that silenced her? Was her own silence a form of self-preservation, or had something more insidious befallen her? I spent the next several days immersed in Morag's journals, perched on a rickety stool in Agnes's dimly lit parlor. The only sounds the crackle of the peat fire and the incessant Highland wind rattling the panes. Morag's meticulous entries, dated from 1790 to 1812, painted a vivid, increasingly unsettling picture of Blackwood Dell. They weren't just a record of disappearances. They were the chronicle of a growing dread, a community slowly suffocating under an unseen menace. Her early entries detailed the initial bewilderment, the desperate searches, and the gradual acceptance of the curse as an explanation. But Morag, with her sharp intellect, quickly saw through the convenient veil of superstition. June 14, 1790, young Ailsa, daughter of the blacksmith, gone, her groom Yane found weeping by the altar stone. The villagers speak of the hungry spirits of the dell, but spirits leave no footprints, disturb no dust. In this place, it is too quiet, too clean. Morag's observations were remarkably astute. She noted the absence of forced entry, the undisturbed nature of the church after each vanishing. The brides weren't being dragged out, they were disappearing, from within the church itself, or from the immediate vicinity of the vestry or the small attached priest's residence. This suggested an intimate knowledge of the building, perhaps even complicity from within its sacred walls. As the disappearances mounted, Morag's entries grew more agitated, more desperate. She began documenting not just the missing brides, but the subtle shifts in the community. The increasing paranoia, the suspicious glances, the hushed conversations. And then, something more chilling emerged. The unusual prosperity of certain families in Blackwood Dell, seemingly disconnected from the general hardship of the times. October 22nd, 1798. Old Hamish, the sexton, speaks of a secret passage beneath the church, known only to the priests of old. A refuge from raiding clans, he says. But what if it serves a darker purpose now? The new timber merchant, Laird MacGregor, arrived barely a year before. Alara vanished, yet his fortunes grow, even as others starve. And he is ever so keen to speak of the curse, to spread the fear. This was a critical detail, A secret passage. It offered a plausible physical mechanism for the disappearances, a way to move a person unseen from within the church. And Laird MacGregor, a timber merchant, prospering amid a supposed curse that should have crippled the local economy, felt like a new, tangible suspect. Morag, it seemed, suspected him too. She often noted his attendance at every wedding, his strangely intense gaze fixed not on the bride and groom, but on the church itself, almost as if he was surveying a property. Her entries began to detail her own clandestine investigations. She explored the church by moonlight, searching for hidden doors, listening for unusual sounds. She spoke to old Hamish repeatedly, gleaning fragmented memories of the passage. She even described a chilling encounter with Laird MacGregor, November 5, 1801. I spoke with Laird MacGregor today, ostensibly about the purchase of some firewood. His eyes are cold, like a winter lock. He asked me, with a strange smile, if I truly believed in the curse. When I hesitated, he laughed, a dry rustling sound. Some mysteries, lass, he said, are best left undisturbed. For the good of the village, a veiled threat, if ever I heard one. He knows something. He is part of it. Morag's increasing certainty that the disappearances were orchestrated by human hands, not supernatural forces, brought her into direct conflict with the prevailing narrative. She saw the curse being actively promoted, almost cultivated, by those who stood to gain. And then, she drew the symbol. The Ouroboros, broken, appeared in a journal entry from 1805. March 12, 1805. I saw it, etched into the rough wood of a crate delivered to MacGregor's warehouse, hidden beneath a tarpaulin, the serpent devouring itself, but its body fractured. I have seen this symbol before, in the old texts I smuggled from the Edinburgh Library. It is an emblem of the Ordo Serpentis, a secretive brotherhood said to have once wielded great influence in the Highlands. They speak of renewal through sacrifice, of reclaiming ancient power. But what sacrifice and what power could they seek in our humble dell? The Ordo Serpentis. The name resonated, sending a chill down my spine. While their presence in Blackwood Dell was unknown, I knew of the Ordo Serpentis from my broader research into historical cults. They were a shadowy, highly disciplined group, rumored to have been active across Scotland and even parts of Europe. Their motives often shrouded in layers of mysticism and brutal pragmatism. They were known for their strict hierarchy and their pursuit of power, often through clandestine means. The mention of sacrifice and ancient power by Morag was terrifyingly prescient. Given the vanished brides, Morag then hypothesized about the purpose of the secret passage. She believed it led not to a mere hiding place, but to an underground network, perhaps even connected to the lock, allowing for the swift, unseen removal of individuals. This would explain the complete lack of trace, the feeling that the earth itself had swallowed them. The latter entries in her journals became less about objective observation and more about desperate, personal struggle. Morag was clearly isolated, her theories dismissed as madness, her sanity questioned. The community, gripped by fear and manipulated by those in power, turned against anyone who challenged the comfortable, albeit terrifying, explanation of a curse. April 2nd, 1812. They watch me, Laird MacGregor's men. Their eyes follow me even to the well. Old Hamish avoids my gaze. Even Agnes, bless her heart, warns me to hold my tongue. The silence is louder than any scream. I feel like a fly caught in a spider's web, the threads tightening, but I cannot stop. These women, they deserve the truth. Their silent cries echo in my dreams. The last entry in Morag's final journal was chillingly brief. Dated May 10th, 1812. May 10th, 1812. The church bells toll. For young Elspeth, the 28th bride. I go now, to the crypt. The passage calls. I must know. Tonight, the truth will be mine, or it will bury me. And with that, Morag's meticulous chronicle ended. Agnes confirmed that Morag Macpherson had indeed vanished shortly after that date, never to be seen again. The official explanation was that she had succumbed to melancholy and wandered onto the moors, never to return. Another disappearance, absorbed into the landscape of Blackwood Dell's grim history, conveniently attributed to mental instability. But I knew better. Morag had gone into the church, following her lead. She had been on the cusp of uncovering the truth. My eyes lingered on the last entry. The date, May 10th, 1812. The 28th bride. The same number of disappearances, the title of this story references. Morag had been the last investigator, the one who came closest. She knew the secret passage existed. She suspected the Ordo Surreptitious, and she paid the ultimate price for her curiosity. What had she found in that crypt? What secrets did the passage hold? And what about the Ordo Serpentis? Were they still active? Or had their influence merely faded into the local lore, leaving a legacy of terror? The possibility that the curse was a sophisticated, ongoing operation, masked by superstition, was a truly terrifying prospect. The silence of Blackwood Dell seemed to deepen, not just with the weight of its grim history, but with the chilling possibility that its dark secrets were still very much alive. The silence in Agnes's parlor, after I finished reading more last entry, was deafening. The air, already heavy with the scent of old paper and peat smoke, seemed to thicken with the unspoken truth. Morag had gone into the crypt, into the very heart of the perceived curse, in pursuit of an awful, human truth, and she had never returned. Her disappearance, conveniently dismissed as a wandering mind, now stood as chilling evidence of the danger she had uncovered. The broken Ouroboros, the Ordo Serpentis, Laird MacGregor's veiled threats, it all coalesced into a terrifying mosaic. So, she wasn't mad, I murmured, more to myself than to Agnes. Agnes, her face a roadmap of Highland stoicism, simply nodded slowly. No, not mad, just too clever for her own good, in a place that didn't like clever women. Her gaze drifted towards the window, as if seeing ghosts on the windswept moor. My grandmother always believed Morag found something down there. Something they didn't want the world to know. The crypt. That was where my investigation had to go next. If Morag had found a secret passage, it would be there. If the Ordo Serpentis had indeed used St. Helena for their sinister ends, its entrance would likely be concealed within the church's most forgotten sacred space. The next morning, armed with Morag's journals, a powerful flashlight, and a growing sense of dread, I made my way to St. Helena Church. The sun, a rare visitor in Blackwood Dell, attempted to pierce the perpetual gray, casting long, skeletal shadows of the gravestones across the crumbling edifice. The old iron gate creaked a mournful protest as I pushed it open. Inside, the church was a tomb of forgotten hopes. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light filtering through the boarded-up windows, illuminating the decaying pews, the peeling paint on the altar, and the pervasive sense of abandonment. The air was cold, stale, and smelled of damp stone, and something else, something subtly metallic and earthy, like old blood and deep soil. It was unsettling. I made my way to the altar, then to the side of the chancel, where a narrow wooden door, almost indistinguishable from the wall, stood partially ajar. This, I knew, led to the crypt. Morag's final words echoed in my mind. I go now, to the crypt. The passage calls. Pushing the door fully open, I was met with a gust of even colder, damper air. A flight of rough-hewn stone steps descended into utter darkness. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing walls slick with condensation, adorned with patches of emerald moss. The air down here was thick with the scent of decay, the musty odor of centuries of undisturbed earth and human remains. The crypt itself was a cramped, vaulted chamber, lined with alcoves holding the skeletal remains of long-dead priests and local gentry. Their names, etched into stone, were barely legible under layers of grime. Coffins, some collapsed, others surprisingly intact, rested on stone plinths. This was a place of eternal rest, or so it was meant to be. But for Morag, it had been a gateway to a terrifying truth. I methodically began my search, my flashlight sweeping across every inch of the damp stone. I checked behind the coffins, ran my hands along the cold walls, listening for any hollow sounds. Morag's journal had been my guide, her suspicions about a secret passage beneath the church, the key. Old Hamish, the sexton, had also mentioned it. But where? Then, my beam caught something. Not a passage, not yet, but a subtle discoloration on the floor near the far wall, behind a particularly large, ornate stone sarcophagus that presumably housed a long-forgotten laird of Blackwood Dell. It was a section of flagstone that didn't quite match the others, subtly darker, with faint scratch marks along its edges, as if it had been moved, repeatedly. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pushed against the sarcophagus, expecting it to be immovable, but to my surprise, it shifted slightly with a groaning sound of stone on stone. It was on concealed rollers, or perhaps a pivot. With a surge of adrenaline, I put my shoulder to it and pushed with all my might. Slowly, painstakingly, the massive stone coffin grated backwards, revealing not a solid wall, but a dark, gaping void, a set of descending steps, rougher and narrower than those leading into the crypt, disappeared into absolute blackness. The air that flowed from this opening was even colder, carrying with it a faint, unsettling echo. This was it. This was the secret passage Morag had sought, the very route by which the brides, and then Morag herself, had likely been spirited away. Taking a deep breath, I switched on my headlamp, clicked on my phone's recording feature, and began my descent. The steps were treacherous, uneven, and slick. I moved slowly, one hand braced against the damp, rough-hewn wall. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of water and the scuff of my boots. The passage was surprisingly long, winding downwards in a gentle spiral. The construction was rudimentary but sturdy, clearly ancient, suggesting it had been there for centuries. Perhaps indeed, as an escape route from Viking raids, as old Hamish had suggested. But its current use was far more chilling. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into a larger, cavernous space. My flashlight beam pierced the gloom, revealing not a single chamber, but a network of underground tunnels, stretching off into the darkness like the arteries of some subterranean beast. The air here was strangely dry, and a faint, acrid smell hung in the atmosphere. Not the decay of the crypt, but something else. Something faintly metallic, something almost industrial. This was no mere passage. This was an underground complex, and it was far larger than anything I had imagined. Along the walls, I saw remnants of crude shelving, rusted tools, and even what looked like the remnants of a makeshift forge. This wasn't just a place for transport. It was a place where work was done, where something was created, or perhaps destroyed. As I explored, a terrifying realization washed over me. The dates of the disappearances, the 28 brides spanning nearly 2 centuries, had always puzzled me. How could a single group maintain such an operation for so long? The answer, staring at me from the damp stone walls, began to form a horrific hypothesis. On one of the support pillars, crudely carved into the stone, was the unmistakable symbol, the broken Ouroboros, the fractured serpent, and beneath it, a series of Roman numerals, neatly carved, indicating different dates, almost like a timeline. I traced them with my finger. MDCCLXXXIX 1789, MDCCXCIII 1793, MDCCCV 1805. The dates of the bride disappearances, but there were also other dates, more recent ones, stretching into the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These were dates that Agnes hadn't spoken of. Dates that predated the curse reaching its full infamy. This was a meticulously maintained ledger, a chilling record of the victims, and it revealed that the disappearances hadn't stopped with Morag or the 28th bride. The curse had simply become so ingrained in Blackwood Dell's lore that further vanishings were absorbed into the existing narrative, never truly questioned by outsiders. The scale of this operation, its longevity, suggested an organization with deep roots and a terrifying level of control, the Ordo Serpentis. Then, my light fell upon a small, alcove-like chamber off the main tunnel, and there, amidst a scattering of rusted metal implements and what looked like dried dark stains on the earth floor, I saw it. A series of rough wooden cots, and on one, a single, faded leather-bound book. Morag's journal. It was her final journal, the one I had found the beginning of in Agnes's attic. But this was the entire journal, filled with even more meticulous observations. And then, the final entries. May 10th, 1812. I am here. The passage is real. This place, it is not empty. The air hums with a faint current. I hear faint voices from further within. They are not alone down here. The symbol is everywhere. This is their lair. May 11th, 1812, faintly scrawled. They bring them here, the brides, not for sacrifice to spirits, but for something else, something scientific, unholy experiments. They are trying to extract something, their fear, their purity, the purpose. I cannot comprehend it. It is monstrous. Laird MacGregor, he is a part of it, a high priest in this vile order. He spoke of the essence of fear, of unlocking the primal power. My blood ran cold. Unholy experiments, extracting the essence of fear or purity. This was not mere criminal enterprise for profit, nor simple religious zealotry. This was something far more depraved, a twisted form of pseudo-scientific ritualism. The curse was a smokescreen for a horrifying, long-term human experiment, an operation of unethical scientific medical practices masquerading as supernatural occurrences. The Ordo Serpentis weren't just a cult. They were a collective of monstrous researchers, using innocent women as their unwilling subjects. The full horror of it slammed into me. 28 brides, not just gone, but subjected to unimaginable terrors for some perverse, scientific purpose. Morag's final words, though faded and trembling, had peeled back the ultimate layer of deception. She had discovered the horrifying truth, and for that, she had been silenced. But what exactly were they trying to extract? And for what purpose did they need the essence of fear? The questions hung in the stale, cold air of the underground complex, more terrifying than any supernatural explanation. The walls of this hidden place seemed to press in on me, revealing not just a dark past, but the chilling possibility that the remnants of this abhorrent research might still exist, waiting to be uncovered. The implications of Morag's final entry sent a cold dread through me, far more profound than any ghost story. Unholy experiments, extracting the essence of fear, unlocking primal power. This wasn't just murder. It was a methodical, long-term program of dehumanization and torture, masked by a convenient legend. The Ordo Serpentis was not a simple cult seeking spiritual enlightenment. They were a group driven by a chillingly rational, yet utterly depraved, objective. I knelt there in the damp, subterranean chamber, the dust motes dancing in my headlamp's beam, illuminating Morag's final, desperate words. Her fear, palpable, even centuries later, was a testament to the horror she had uncovered. These forgotten tunnels, the same ones I now occupied, had witnessed unimaginable suffering. The air, heavy with the scent of earth, and something else I couldn't quite place, seemed to thrum with the echoes of silent screams. My attention turned to the rusted implements scattered on the ground. They were crude, some resembling surgical tools, others more akin to devices for restraint. A rusty iron collar lay half buried in the soil, its inner surface corroded. This wasn't a place for ritualistic sacrifice in the traditional sense. It was a makeshift laboratory of torment. The full horror of the Ordo Serpentis's methods began to crystallize. They weren't just abducting brides. They were actively creating a highly controlled environment of terror. Why? Why would anyone systematically inflict such suffering? Fragmented thoughts provided the only clue, unlocking the primal power, the essence of fear. I meticulously documented everything, taking photographs with my phone, sketching the layout of the tunnels, and carefully bagging any small artifacts I could find. Each piece of evidence felt like a whisper from the past, a silent testimony from the lost brides. The timeline of Roman numerals carved into the stone pillar confirmed that this horrifying enterprise spanned generations, suggesting a succession of individuals within the Ordo Serpentis dedicated to this vile research. How could such a monstrous secret be maintained for so long in a community like Blackwood Dell? As I ventured deeper into the network of tunnels, the metallic, earthy smell grew stronger. The tunnels branched off in several directions, and I had to be careful not to get lost. I chose the path that seemed most frequently used, guided by the faint impressions of boot prints in the dust. Centuries old, yet still discernible. This particular tunnel led to a larger, more excavated chamber. Here, the walls were shored up, with rough-hewn timbers, remarkably preserved despite the passage of time. In the center of this chamber, my headlamp revealed a horrifying sight, a large stone slab, deeply stained, with rusted chains embedded in its surface. This was an operating table, or perhaps a sacrificial altar for their experiments. Surrounding it were smaller tables, littered with ancient, broken glass vials, remnants of what looked like primitive distillation equipment, and various corroded surgical instruments. It was here that the true nature of their depravity became sickeningly clear. This wasn't about spirits or curses. It was about the systematic extraction of something intangible, something linked to the extreme psychological states induced by terror. Were they trying to isolate a chemical compound released by fear? A psychological phenomenon? The scientific methods might have been crude, but the intent was disturbingly modern in its cold, calculated cruelty. I imagined the terrified brides, brought here on their wedding nights, stripped of their joy and hope, subjected to unspeakable horrors in this subterranean laboratory. The thought was nauseating. This was the dark side of humanity laid bare, the pursuit of knowledge or power at any cost, regardless of the suffering inflicted. My light then caught a series of meticulous, if grotesque diagrams etched into a section of the stone wall. They depicted the human nervous system, crude anatomical sketches, and symbols that looked like alchemical notations merged with early biological illustrations. One diagram showed a crude representation of the brain, with lines radiating from it, connecting two symbols, representing emotions, terror, despair, ecstasy. Beneath it, a phrase, written in Latin, which I immediately recognized. Experientia per timor, et per pitius. Experience through fear and purity. The Ordo Serpentis believed they could unlock some primal power by subjecting their victims, specifically pure brides, to the most extreme forms of fear. This wasn't just pseudoscience. It was a twisted philosophy, a pursuit of ultimate control over the human psyche, perhaps even an attempt to manipulate it for their own gain. The purity of the brides likely referred to their innocence, their untainted state before marriage, which the cult perhaps believed made them ideal specimens for their abhorrent research. My gaze drifted to a smaller, sealed-off section of the chamber, almost like a vault. The entrance was a heavy iron door, rusted, but still incredibly thick. It had a complex, ancient lock, clearly designed to withstand tampering. A faint symbol of the broken Ouroboros was etched into its surface. This was clearly a storage area. But for what? More tools? Records? Or something far worse? I tried the handle, but the door was locked tight. The mechanism was beyond my ability to pick. This vault, I suspected, held the true culmination of their research, the preserved results of centuries of terror. It was a tantalizing, terrifying prospect. As I pondered my next move, a chilling realization struck me. The air in the chamber had grown colder, and the silence, which had been so absolute, now seemed to press in on me, almost a physical presence. The thought of being trapped down here, in the very heart of the Ordo Serpentis's former operations, was deeply unsettling. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached my ears. A soft, rhythmic dripping, not of water, but something else. And then, a subtle tremor, deep beneath the earth. It was fleeting, easily dismissed, as the old church settling. But in the oppressive silence of the tunnels, it felt magnified, a warning. I checked my phone, no signal, of course. I was miles beneath a forgotten church in the middle of nowhere. I was utterly alone with the ghosts of the past, as I moved to retrace my steps. To find a way out and alert the authorities, my flashlight beam briefly caught something else, tucked into a small crevice in the wall near the exit to the passage. A small, tarnished silver locket. It was open, revealing a faded miniature portrait of a young woman with a kind smile and hopeful eyes. And on the back, crudely scratched, were the initials, E. Malera MacLeod. The first bride, vanished in 1789. She had been here. Her locket, a tangible link to her, lay discarded, a poignant testament to her last moments of terror. She had been one of the first, and her locket was left behind, a silent scream across the centuries. The tremor returned, stronger this time, accompanied by a low, guttural groan from deeper within the earth. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The air grew noticeably colder, and the faint metallic smell intensified, now mingled with a new, cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. It was the scent of something ancient, disturbed, and profoundly wrong. This complex wasn't as dormant as I had initially believed. Was something still active down here? Had the Ordo Serpentis truly disbanded, or had their research simply continued in secret, evolving with the times? The thought was almost unbearable. I had stumbled not just upon a historical crime, but potentially an ongoing horror. The broken Ouroboros, the cycle of terror, had it ever truly been broken? As the groaning deepened and the chamber began to vibrate, I realized I was in grave danger. The subtle tremors were growing, and the integrity of the ancient tunnels seemed to be failing. Or was something else happening, something more deliberate? The sound was no longer just the settling of earth. It was the distinct scraping of stone on stone, coming from beyond the iron door, from within the vault itself. Was the vault being opened, or was something trying to get out? The scraping sound from beyond the iron vault door intensified, a terrible grinding of ancient metal on stone that echoed through the subterranean chamber, amplified by the confined space. It was too regular, too deliberate, to be a mere tremor or the collapse of old Earth. Something, or someone, was actively manipulating that heavy door. A wave of ice-cold fear washed over me, raw and primal. Morag's words, "They are not alone, down here," screamed in my mind. My flashlight beam, which had seemed so powerful moments before, now felt like a fragile beacon against an encroaching darkness. The air grew colder still, and the cloying sweetness that had mingled with the metallic scent was now distinctly chemical, almost like formaldehyde, mixed with something else, a faint, musky odor that defied identification, yet felt inherently wrong. I pressed myself against the rough stone wall, trying to become one with the shadows. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure terror. Who could be down here? Was it a remnant of the Ordo Serpentis, still active after all these centuries? Or had my intrusion somehow triggered a hidden mechanism, awakening something? Long dormant, the scraping ceased abruptly, replaced by a low guttural groan, not from the earth, but from beyond the vault. It was a sound that was undeniably organic, a deep exhalation, or perhaps a stifled cry. My hand instinctively went to my phone, pressing record, the small red light a grim comfort in the suffocating blackness. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to run back through the winding tunnels, but an unyielding, morbid curiosity, born of years of chasing elusive historical truths, kept me rooted to the spot. I had to know. Then, a faint metallic click, followed by the deep, resonant thud of a heavy bolt disengaging. The iron door to the vault, which had seemed impregnable, began to creak open, slowly, agonizingly, revealing nothing but deeper shadows within. My breath hitched in my throat. As the gap widened, a foul, stagnant air poured out, thick and heavy, carrying the reek of damp decay and something indescribably ancient. My headlamp pierced the gloom, revealing a short, narrow passage leading into the vault. It was not a storage area for records, as I had initially suspected. It was a holding cell, and within it, bathed in the trembling beam of my light, stood a figure. It was undeniably human, yet horrifyingly wrong. Tall and gaunt, its skin was a mottled gray, stretched taut over prominent bones. Its eyes, deep and shadowed, seemed to reflect no light, only an abyssal emptiness. Its hair, what little remained, was a sparse, white wispy halo around a distorted skull. It was clad in what appeared to be remnants of ancient, rotted cloth, clinging to its skeletal frame. This was no spectral entity. This was a living, breathing being, albeit one that had endured unimaginable conditions. Its movements were slow, jerky, as if its joints were stiff from centuries of inactivity. It raised a hand, thin and skeletal, towards the light, as if in pain, or perhaps curiosity. My mind reeled, struggling to reconcile what I was seeing with any rational explanation. How could a human being survive in such conditions for so long? Had they been kept alive through some horrific means, a perverse result of the Ordo Serpentis' experiments? The creature, for I could think of it as nothing else, let out another groan, this one accompanied by a raspy, wet cough. Its chest heaved, and the ancient cloths shifted, revealing glimpses of a stitched-up torso. Crude sutures visible even through the grime and decay. The implications were horrifying. This was not a natural state. This was a creation, a grotesque testament to the Ordo Serpentis' unethical scientific medical practices. The phrase unlocking primal power suddenly took on an even more terrifying meaning. Had they been trying to extend life, to create some form of altered human? The brides had been subjected to the essence of fear. Was this the outcome? A living embodiment of prolonged terror, a byproduct of their vile research. The creature took a shuffling step forward, its form swaying precariously. Its eyes, though dark and empty, seemed to fix on me with an unsettling intelligence, a flicker of something ancient and knowing. It was trying to communicate, I felt, but its vocal cords seemed to have forgotten how. A faint, wheezing sound escaped its lips, like air struggling through rusted pipes, as it moved further into the chamber. My headlamp caught something else on the floor of the vault, behind where the creature had stood. More remnants of archaic medical equipment, but also a series of thick, leather-bound ledgers, stacked neatly. These looked newer, less decayed than Morag's journals. These were the true records of the Ordo Serpentis. This creature, whatever it was undoubtedly a survivor of their horrific experiments, perhaps even the last one. It was a living, breathing artifact of their depravity, a testament to what they were truly trying to achieve, and its existence here meant the curse was not just a historical event, but a living, festering wound. Suddenly, a realization, chilling and immediate, struck me. The symbol of the broken Ouroboros, a serpent devouring its own tail, symbolizing cycles, eternity, a fractured circle. Was this creature, in its horrifying state, a manifestation of their attempt to break the cycle of life and death, to achieve some twisted form of immortality or extended existence through their primal power. Experiments, and the fractures in the symbol, the imperfections, the grotesque result, like the being before me. The creature stopped a few feet from me, its head cocked slightly, as if listening. Its breath was shallow, ragged, and then, from somewhere deeper within the complex, a faint, almost imperceptible thump. It was the sound of a heavy door, further, down one of the other tunnels, closing, or opening. The air shifted, and I caught a faint scent of something metallic and sharp, entirely distinct from the decay. It was the scent of freshly disturbed earth, and something else, a modern chemical, aroma, like disinfectant. This wasn't just ancient horror. My intrusion had clearly disturbed something, and it wasn't just the creature in the vault. The creature's gaze, fixed on me, now held a flicker of urgency, almost a silent plea. It seemed to want to warn me, to convey something about the sound I had just heard. It raised its skeletal hand again, pointing a long, emaciated finger towards one of the unlit tunnels branching off from the main chamber, the direction from which the new, disturbing sound had originated. My blood ran cold. The Ordo Serpentis, or at least its descendants, were still active. They were still using these tunnels. They were here, and I had walked right into their lair, disturbing their centuries-old secret. The creature before me was a terrifying sentinel, a living warning. I had to get out. I had to alert the outside world to this living horror, to the true nature of the curse, and to the monstrous legacy that continued to fester beneath Blackwood Dell. But the way out was through the secret passage I had entered, and the creature was now blocking my direct path, albeit seemingly inadvertently. The sounds from the other tunnels were growing louder, more distinct, the shuffling of feet, the faint murmur of voices. They were coming. The shuffling sounds and faint murmurs from the other tunnel were undeniably human, yet laced with an unnatural stealth. They were coming for me. The creature from the vault, its gaunt face etched with a silent, ancient sorrow, continued to point a trembling finger towards the other passage, its dark, empty eyes holding a desperate plea. It was a warning, a living relic of the horrors wrought by the Ordo Serpentis, now urging me to flee from its tormentors. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm me. My academic pursuit had morphed into a horrifying game of survival. I had unearthed a truth so monstrous, it still walked among the living. The ancient, secret society wasn't merely a historical footnote. It was a continuing, insidious force, operating from the shadows of St. Helena Church. I needed to make a choice, and quickly. Confrontation with whatever was coming was not an option. My only hope lay in retracing my steps through the secret passage back to the crypt, and then to the surface. But the creature, frail as it seemed, was between me and the main passage entrance. "Move," I whispered, my voice raw, though whether I was speaking to the creature or myself, I wasn't sure. "Please, move." The creature understood. With a guttural wheeze, it slowly shuffled aside, its movements pained and deliberate, revealing the entrance to the spiral passage. Its eyes, however, remained fixed on the other tunnel, a silent testimony to the terror it knew was approaching. I didn't hesitate. Gripping my flashlight, I scrambled past the creature, heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. I cast one last, horrified glance back at the vault and the skeletal figure. It stood as a tragic monument to human cruelty, a silent scream frozen in time. I owed it to those lost brides, and to Morag, to expose this. Adrenaline surged through me as I plunged back into the narrow, winding passage. The descent had been slow and cautious. The ascent was a frantic climb. My boots slipped on the damp stone, my hands scraped against the rough walls. But I pushed myself upwards, driven by the chilling knowledge that every second brought them closer. The faint sounds of movement and muffled voices echoed behind me, growing steadily louder. They knew I was here. As I ascended, the air gradually lost its acrid, chemical temps, replaced by the musty scent of the crypt. The faint light filtering from the small crypt door above was a beacon of hope. I was so close. Bursting through the sarcophagus opening and into the crypt, I barely registered the familiar chamber. My eyes darted to the wooden door leading back into the church proper. It was still partially ajar. Relief, sweet and intoxicating, flooded through me. I was almost free, but as I reached the base of the crypt steps, a low, controlled voice echoed from the main body of the church. Well, it seems the curious academic has found his way into our humble chapel's secrets. I froze. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway leading from the church into the crypt, blocking my escape. He was tall, dressed in dark, modern, outdoor gear, and carried a high-powered tactical flashlight that cut through the gloom with an unnerving precision. His face was obscured by the glare, but his posture was one of cold, unwavering authority. Two more figures emerged from the deeper shadows of the church, equally well equipped, their faces grim. They carried no ancient tools or ceremonial robes. They were efficient, modern, and utterly menacing. Dr. Thorne, I presume. The lead figure continued, his voice calm, almost cordial, a chilling contrast to the situation. We've been expecting someone like you to come poking around sooner or later. The old narratives, as you call them, tend to attract the inquisitive. My mind raced. How did they know my name? How long had they been watching? This wasn't a sudden, accidental encounter. They had been aware of my presence, perhaps even anticipating my discovery. The thump I had heard in the tunnels hadn't been a collapse. It had been a signal, an alert. The Ordo Serpentis, I stated, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. It was less a question and more a challenge. The figure chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. A rather archaic term, wouldn't you say? We prefer to think of ourselves as custodians of a unique lineage of inquiry. And you, Dr. Thorne, have stumbled upon the very heart of our work. Your work is a legacy of torture and murder, I retorted, bile rising in my throat. 28 brides, and Morag McPherson. And that poor soul in the vault. The figure's face remained impassive in the flashlight's glare. Collateral. Necessary components for a far grander design. Ignorant sacrifices in the pursuit of profound truth. His words confirmed my worst fears. They were not merely maintaining a historical secret. They were continuing the abhorrent experiments. The creature in the vault was not a relic. It was likely a subject, a test of their long-term methods. You've learned too much, Doctor, one of the flanking figures said, stepping forward, a heavy, blunted object clutched in his hand. A regrettable turn of events. I instinctively took a step back, pressing myself against the cold stone wall of the crypt. There was no escape this way. I was trapped. I had come seeking answers, and I had found them, but at a terrible price. My mind frantically searched for an alternative. Any alternative. The lead figure raised a hand, stopping his subordinate. No need for unnecessary force. Dr. Thorne is an academic, not a common ruffian. We can be civilized. His tone was chilling, implying a far more sinister form of civilization. Come, Dr. Thorne, join us. We have much to discuss. Perhaps you could even contribute to our inquiry. Your intellect, after all, is quite sharp, judging by your rapid deductions. He was offering me a choice, or rather, a twisted proposition. Join them, or face whatever dark fate awaited those who threatened their secrets. The thought of collaborating with such monsters made my stomach churn, but the alternative was a chilling unknown. What was behind that forced cordiality? What horrors would joining them truly entail? As they began to advance, slowly, deliberately, the lead figure's flashlight beam caught the silver locket lying by my feet, the one belonging to Alara MacLeod, the first vanished bride. A flicker of something, perhaps recognition, crossed his face. He bent down, picking it up. "A souvenir?" he asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. "From our early days. We've refined our methodology considerably since then. You see, Dr. Thorne, the curse was merely the elegant, folkloric veil. The true mechanism, the true purpose, is far more scientific. We are not just unearthing secrets. We are creating them." His words confirmed that the ethical violations were not a relic of the past, but an active, evolving pursuit. This was a long-running criminal enterprise, disguised as a historical curse, rooted in religious fanaticism but evolving into monstrous, unethical scientific practices, all to achieve some hidden, perverse power. The scale of their deception was staggering. Just as the men closed in, a low, wet cough echoed from the passage behind me. It was the creature from the vault, its skeletal form now, standing at the edge of the deeper tunnel entrance, its eyes fixed on my captors. A low, mournful sound emanated from it, a sound of protest, of ancient sorrow. The men paused, their focus momentarily diverted by the unexpected appearance of their subject. This was my chance. With a desperate surge of strength, I spun around and launched myself into the deep, dark passage from which the creature had emerged, rather than attempting to bypass my captors back up the main crypt stairs. It was a risky, desperate gamble, a dive into an unknown that might be even more dangerous than the men pursuing me. But it was the only way. As I scrambled deeper into the inky blackness, the last thing I heard was the enraged shout of the lead figure and the ominous thud of heavy boots on the stone behind me. I was now truly trapped in the labyrinth, the hunted, with a living nightmare at my back and a dangerous, modern cult in pursuit. What new terrors awaited me in the unmapped depths of the Ordo Serpentis' lair? The desperate leap into the unknown depths of the tunnel was a plunge into immediate, suffocating darkness. The creature's low, mournful sound and the enraged shouts of my pursuers faded quickly behind me, swallowed by the ancient earth. My headlamp, my only source of light, cut a trembling path through the oppressive black, illuminating rough-hewn walls that pressed in on all sides. The air here was even colder, thick with the same cloying, chemical sweetness I had noticed earlier, now more pronounced. This was a section of the underground complex I hadn't explored. It branched off from the central chamber, where the operating table lay, leading deeper, further away from the main crypt passage. The ground was uneven, littered with loose stones, making rapid movement perilous. I stumbled, my ankle twisting painfully, but the primal urge to escape kept me on my feet. My mind raced, frantically trying to piece together a map of this subterranean nightmare. The Ordo Serpentis had clearly expanded these tunnels over centuries, creating a sprawling, hidden network. How far did it extend, and what else did it conceal? The thought of being lost down here, hunted by a sophisticated cult that masqueraded as a historical curse, was a fate I couldn't bear to contemplate. As I pressed onward, the faint scent of disinfectant and disturbed earth grew stronger, confirming that my pursuers were closer than I dared to imagine. Their heavy boots echoed faintly, a rhythmic cadence of pursuit, chillingly deliberate. They knew this labyrinth. I was at a profound disadvantage. The tunnel began to narrow, forcing me to hunch over. The walls were no longer rough stone. They became smoother, almost polished in places, as if by centuries of friction or deliberate construction. Here and there, I saw faded, stylized carvings of the broken Ouroboros, silent markers of their omnipresent influence. The air thrummed with an unsettling stillness, broken only by my ragged breathing and the distant footsteps. Then, I noticed something else. A faint, almost imperceptible humming sound, vibrating through the very stone beneath my feet. It was too regular to be natural, too consistent. It wasn't mechanical, like machinery, but rather a low, resonant frequency, a deep, pervasive hum that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the earth. It was unsettling, almost hypnotic. The tunnel suddenly opened into another large, circular chamber, unlike any I had seen. This chamber was clearly more modern, or at least, recently renovated. The walls were lined with what appeared to be panels, and the air felt strangely deadened, as if sound itself was being absorbed. In the center of the room, a large cylindrical contraption stood, gleaming faintly in my headlamp's beam. It was made of some dark polished metal, adorned with an array of blinking lights and intricate dials, hinting at complex, unknown functions. Tubes and wires snaked from it, disappearing into the walls. This was no ancient torture chamber. This was a laboratory, cutting edge for its time, perhaps even for mine, given the unusual materials and design. This was where the unethical scientific medical practices of the Ordo Serpentis continued, where their monstrous research had evolved. The hum emanated from this device, a low, powerful thrum that vibrated through the floor. My eyes darted around the chamber. On one side, a series of sleek, metallic cages, far more advanced than the crude cots in the earlier chamber. They were empty. On another wall, shelves filled with vials and syringes, clearly medical grade, some filled with opaque, viscous liquids. And then, a table covered with gleaming, sterile surgical instruments, far more refined than the rusted implements I had found earlier. They were clean, meticulously arranged, ready for immediate use. This was their active site. This was where they conducted their current experiments. Realization sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. The creature in the vault, was it a predecessor to whatever they were now attempting to achieve here? A sudden, sharp clang echoed from the tunnel entrance I had just exited, followed by hushed, urgent whispers. They had reached the previous chamber. They were right behind me. I scanned the circular room frantically, searching for another exit. There, on the far side, obscured by the massive cylindrical device, was another narrow opening, almost hidden from view. It was smaller, less obvious, and might offer a chance to escape. As I moved towards it, my gaze snagged on a series of framed documents displayed on a table near the cylindrical machine. They were old, but meticulously preserved. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the script. They were records of subjects, medical notes, meticulously detailing physiological responses to various stimuli, including what was clearly induced terror. The dates on these records spanned decades, even centuries, illustrating the chilling continuity of their research. One document, more prominently displayed, caught my eye. It was a single, large sheet of parchment, filled with elegant calligraphy, but beneath the ornate script, a series of intricate, highly detailed anatomical diagrams. And at the bottom, a Latin phrase, bolder than the rest: Timor, animia sentia, fear is the soul's essence. Soul's essence. This was their fundamental belief, their guiding principle. They believed that fear, in its purest, most extreme form, was not merely an emotion, but the very essence of the human soul, a concentrated power they could harness. And the brides, with their innocence and vulnerability, were the perfect vessels for this horrific extraction. The Ordo Serpentis was not merely a criminal enterprise. It was a deeply philosophical, yet utterly depraved order, pursuing an unthinkable, scientific objective. The footsteps were louder now, accompanied by the distinct click of a safety being disengaged on a firearm. They were entering the chamber. I had mere seconds. Ignoring the chilling discoveries, I lunged for the hidden opening. It was indeed a passage, even narrower and darker than the one I had just traversed, descending steeply into what felt like the very bowels of the earth. As I squeezed through, I heard the lead figure's voice, now sharp with anger, echoing into the circular chamber. "He's in here. Block the other exit." I scrambled down the new passage, propelled by sheer terror. It wound downwards, becoming increasingly claustrophobic, the air growing thick and heavy. The humming sound, emanating from the chamber above, seemed to follow me, vibrating through the stone, an omnipresent reminder of their sinister operations. Suddenly, the passage ended abruptly, opening into a vast, natural cavern. The air was different here, fresher, carrying the faint, earthy scent of a deep cave. My headlamp cast its beam across towering stalagmites and stalactites, glistening with moisture. A faint, distant sound reached my ears, the rhythmic, gentle lapping of water, a subterranean lake. I had found my way to an underground lock, perhaps connected to the very lock of Blackwood Dell. This was it, the escape route Morag had hypothesized, the way they moved their victims, unseen, from the church. But as my light swept across the cavern, it revealed more than just natural rock formations. Along one wall, nestled in a hidden alcove, were several small, sleek, modern boats, designed for silent movement, and nearby, a collection of what appeared to be waterproof containers, stacked neatly. These were used for transport. This was their supply route, their ingress and egress. The network was far more extensive, far more sophisticated than I could have ever imagined. The curse had always been a masterclass in misdirection. Just as I took a tentative step towards the water, a voice amplified by the cavern's acoustics boomed from the passage I had just exited. "Thorn, you cannot escape. We know these tunnels better than you know your own mind." The sound of footsteps echoed into the cavern, closer now. They were almost here. My only hope was the water. But what lay beneath the surface of that dark, silent lock? And would it lead me to freedom, or to a watery grave, another forgotten victim of the Ordo Sur? The truth I had uncovered was both horrific and liberating, but only if I could survive to tell it. The booming voice of the lead cultist, amplified by the cavern's acoustics, reverberated through the vast chamber, a chilling declaration of my imminent capture. "Thorn, you cannot escape. We know these tunnels better than you know your own mind." His words were followed by the rapid, echoing footsteps of his associates. They were right behind me, and the entrance to the cavern was now just a dark maw against the faint light of their headlamps. My own headlamp beam danced across the dark, still surface of the subterranean lock. The water was unnervingly black, reflecting no light, as if it absorbed all hope. The faint scent of damp earth and stagnant water hung heavy in the air, a natural counterpoint to the synthetic chemical smell of the cult's laboratory. This was it, my last, desperate gamble. I plunged into the frigid water without a second thought. The cold was a shock, stealing my breath and making my muscles seize. The sudden immersion was disorienting, and I fought against the urge to gasp, knowing any sound would betray my position. My clothes, heavy and sodden, dragged me down. I kicked frantically, forcing myself deeper, away from the cavern entrance. The silence beneath the water was absolute, broken only by the muffled thud of my own frantic heartbeat. It was a terrifying, yet strangely liberating, silence. Here, in the cold embrace of the underground lock, I was momentarily safe from their voices, from their pursuit. But how long could I hold my breath? And where did this water lead? My headlamp, thankfully waterproof, cut a narrow beam through the inky blackness of the water. Below me, nothing but the abyss. Above, a faint, rippling reflection of the cavern ceiling. I swam blindly, propelled by a desperate, animalistic instinct for survival. I pictured Morag McPherson, centuries ago, perhaps making this very same, desperate escape, or perhaps being forced into this very water by her captors. The thought fueled my resolve. I had to survive to tell her story. And the story of the 28 brides. After what felt like an eternity, my lungs screamed for air. I pushed upwards, breaking the surface with a silent gasp. The air was still thick and cold, but it was air. I was in a smaller, narrower section of the lock, a natural tunnel carved by water erosion. The cultists' lights were nowhere in sight. The deep, guttural hum from their hidden laboratory was faintly audible even here, a pervasive, unsettling reminder of their presence. I clung to a jagged rock outcrop, gasping for breath, shivering uncontrollably. My body felt numb with the cold, but my mind was sharp, racing. This underground lock was clearly part of their system, a hidden artery of their operations. But was it an escape route for victims, or merely a discreet access point for the cultists themselves? Given the 28 brides and the Ordo Serpentis' purpose, it seemed more likely to be a means of disposal, or perhaps transportation to another, more remote, and even more secure location. As I regained some semblance of control, I heard it again, the faint, muffled sound of a boat motor, far in the distance, but definitely approaching. They had boats in the cavern, silent ones designed for exactly this purpose. They knew this labyrinthine waterway. They had anticipated this. Panic threatened to seize me again, but I forced it down. My only option was to keep moving, to find an exit. I pushed off the rock and began to swim again, following the faint current, hoping it would lead me to an egress, to the surface, to freedom. The tunnel twisted and turned, at times wide enough to be a small chamber, at others barely allowing me to squeeze through. The walls were smooth and slick with millennia of water flow. My headlamp occasionally caught glimpses of strange, pale aquatic life, blind fish, translucent crabs, thriving in this sunless world. Then, ahead of me, a faint ethereal glow. Not my headlamp, but a natural light source. Hope surged through me, revitalizing my numbed limbs. Was it the surface? Was it the moon, or the stars? As I drew closer, the glow resolved itself into a thin, vertical crack in the rock face, far above the waterline, a fissure, allowing a sliver of natural light to penetrate the darkness. It was impossibly narrow, seemingly too small for a human to pass through, but it offered a tantalizing glimpse of the world above. And through that crack, carried on a faint breeze, I smelled it, the earthy scent of pine, and the damp, fresh smell of the highlands after rain. This was a connection to the outside, not a direct exit, but a sign that the lock was indeed linked to the surface. It was a long shot, but it was my only shot. Suddenly, the muffled sound of the boat motor grew louder, and I saw a faint ripple on the water behind me, disturbed by something moving swiftly beneath the surface. They were in the water. They were almost on me. I pushed myself faster, summoning every last reserve of strength. My arms and legs ached, protesting the cold and the exertion. I reached the fissure, pulling myself onto a slippery ledge just beneath the crack. It was a tight squeeze, a desperate climb up the wet, slick rock face. My fingers found purchase on tiny ledges. My boots scrabbled for footholds. I had to shed my heavy backpack. It was slowing me down too much. With a pang, I let it sink into the dark waters, hoping Morag's journals and my recorded evidence were safe within its waterproof casing. As I strained upwards, I heard the boat drawing closer, its silent motor now, a low hum just yards away. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the water, sweeping across the surface, getting closer to my position. I hauled myself through the narrow crack, scraping my skin raw on the sharp edges of the rock. It was a painful, agonizing squeeze, but the scent of pine and fresh air spurred me on. Finally, with a grunt of exertion, I pulled myself free, tumbling onto a patch of damp, mossy ground. I was outside, but not in the open. I was in a small, hidden grotto, shrouded by thick, ancient pines, their branches draped with moss, their needles forming a soft, decaying carpet on the forest floor. Above me, through the canopy of trees, a sliver of moon hung in the inky sky, casting a pale, spectral light on the scene. I was still in Blackwood Dell, but in a part of the forest I didn't recognize. The air was cool, crisp, and clean, a welcome contrast to the oppressive, chemical-laden air of the tunnels. I was free, of the immediate pursuit, but I was still very much in danger. They would know I had escaped through the lock. They would search. They would search. As I lay there, gasping, trying to calm my ragged breathing, I heard the faint, distant sound of the boat stopping in the cavern below, and then the frustrated shouts of the cultists. They knew I was gone. My clothes were soaked. My body was shaking uncontrollably from the cold, and I was bruised and exhausted. But I was alive. I had survived the labyrinth. I had the knowledge, the horrifying truth about the Ordo Serpentis and their abominable experiments. The curse was a lie, a sophisticated cover for generations of depravity. But what now? I was in the heart of their territory, injured and exposed. How could I, a lone academic, expose a secret society with such deep roots and such ruthless methods? The moon, peering through the dense canopy, seemed to watch, silent and indifferent. My escape was only the beginning. The real fight, the fight to bring justice for the 28 brides and to dismantle this vile organization, was still ahead. Could I find help in a community so long manipulated by fear and deception? And would they believe a story so unbelievable, so grim, it defied all rational explanation? The biting cold of the Highland night was a cruel awakening, sharpening my senses even as it numbed my body. I was out, but not safe. The shouts echoing from the cavern below, though distant, were a stark reminder that my hunters were relentless, well-resourced, and utterly ruthless. The pine-scented air, though refreshing after the stagnant gloom of the tunnels, carried with it the palpable threat of pursuit. My headlamp had flickered and died after my scramble through the fissure, leaving me in near total darkness. Guided only by the sparse moonlight filtering through the dense canopy, my immediate priority was to find shelter, and more importantly, to find Agnes. She was the only one in Blackwood Dell who had shown any inclination towards the truth. However, reluctantly, if anyone would believe me, it would be her. And if anyone knew the old forgotten paths through the moor, the ones that skirted the main roads and avoided watchful eyes, it would be a local like her. The grotto I found myself in was a natural alcove in a rocky outcrop, hidden by a thick curtain of moss and bracken. It offered temporary concealment, but no real security. I huddled deeper into the shadows, listening, my ears straining for any sign of movement, any snap of a twig that wasn't my own. The moon, a sliver of silver, cast long distorted shadows that seemed to dance with unseen threats. I tried to recall my surroundings. Blackwood Dell was isolated, but it wasn't entirely cut off. There was a single, winding road that led out of the village, eventually connecting to a larger, albeit still, remoter road. My escape route had clearly brought me deep into the wilder, less frequented parts of the dell, away from the church, but also away from any immediate help. After what felt like an eternity, the faint sounds of pursuit receded. They were searching, but not in my immediate vicinity. They would assume I was still trapped in the underground system, or perhaps drowned in the lock. That gave me a precious window of opportunity. Moving slowly, painfully, I began to navigate the treacherous terrain. My ankle throbbed, a dull ache that punctuated every step. The ground was uneven, treacherous, and I stumbled often. I used the distant, faint glow of the village lights as my crude compass, pushing through dense thickets of heather and over slippery moss-covered rocks. The cold seeped into my bones, a constant reminder of my vulnerability. It took hours. The first hint of dawn, a faint smudge of bruised purple on the eastern horizon, was my salvation. As the light grew, I finally saw the familiar, if still dilapidated, cluster of cottages that made up Blackwood Dell, and there, standing stark against the encroaching light, was the rectory where Agnes lived. I approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows, my eyes scanning for any sign of movement around the church or the rectory. There was none. The village seemed to be slowly stirring, smoke beginning to curl from chimneys, but the overwhelming impression was one of quiet, almost unnatural, calm. A calm that now seemed sinister in the harsh light of the truths I carried. I rapped softly on Agnes's door, a desperate, urgent knock that belied my exhaustion. After a moment, I heard shuffling within, and then the creak of the door, opening a sliver. Agnes, her face a mask of concern, peered out. Her eyes widened in alarm as she saw my disheveled, soaked, and bruised state. "Dr. Thorne, what in God's name?" she began, her voice a hushed gasp. "Agnes," I whispered, pushing my way inside. "They're here. The Ordo Serpentis. They're still active. The curse. It's all a lie. They were experimenting on the brides. They're still doing it." My words tumbled out, raw with the horror of my discoveries. Agnes, surprisingly, didn't recoil in disbelief. Her eyes, instead, filled with a deep, ancient sorrow, a confirmation of the truths her grandmother had tried to impart. She led me to her hearth, wrapped me in a thick, scratchy wool blanket, and poured me a mug of scalding tea, laced with a generous amount of strong whiskey. The warmth seeped into my bones, bringing a semblance of life back to my shivering body. As I drank, I recounted everything: Morag's last entries, the secret passage, the underground complex, the horrifying laboratory, the ancient, living creature in the vault, and the pursuing cultists. I detailed their timor enemy essentia philosophy, their pursuit of fear's essence. Agnes listened in silence, her face grim, occasionally nodding, as if confirming details she had long suspected but dared not articulate. When I finished, the silence in the small cottage was profound, broken only by the crackle of the fire. My grandmother. "She was right," Agnes finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "She said they were devils in human skin. Not ghosts, but men. Always men." She looked at me, her faded eyes filled with a fierce determination. "What do we do, Dr. Thorne? How do we fight such darkness?" Her question was a call to action, a recognition that this was no longer a solitary academic pursuit, but a desperate struggle for justice. It was an affirmation of my belief that the truth, however horrific, needed to be brought to light. "We need help," I stated, my voice gaining strength with the warmth and the newfound resolve. "We need to contact the authorities, but not the local police. They've either been compromised, or they're too small town to handle something of this scale. This is a criminal enterprise, a sophisticated centuries-old conspiracy. We need national law enforcement, perhaps even a specialized unit." Agnes nodded slowly. The local constables. They are good men, but they are from the Dell. They would be helpless against this, and perhaps even in their ranks. There are whispers, connections." She paused. "My family has always had a way with the old paths, the ones unseen. I can get you to the nearest town with a proper post office, where you can send a telegram or make a call from a public telephone. It's a long walk, but it's safe from the main roads." She was offering her help, her local knowledge, her courage, a vulnerable survivor, now an ally. This was crucial. I couldn't do this alone. "We need to plan meticulously," I continued, sketching a rough map of the tunnels on a scrap of paper from Morag's journals. "We know their lab is active. We know they have that creature in the vault. We know they are organized and armed. We can't just rush in. We need to gather undeniable evidence, enough to compel external authorities to act, to take this seriously." "And the journals?" Agnes asked, her gaze falling on my backpack, still waterlogged and heavy with mud. "Morag's journals, and your own recordings, are they safe?" A wave of dread washed over me. I had to leave my backpack in the lock when I climbed out. It was weighing me down too much. I hoped its waterproofing would protect the journals and my phone, but it was a desperate gamble. Agnes's face fell. "Without proof, they will dismiss you, call you mad, just as they dismissed Morag. The weight of our task, the sheer impossibility of convincing the world of such a monstrous truth without concrete evidence, pressed down on us. Then we go back for it, I said, a grim determination hardening my voice. Not now, not immediately, but we need those journals. They are the key. They are the voice of the victims, and the chronicle of the Ordo Serpentis' crimes. Agnes looked at me, her eyes reflecting the dawning realization of the impossible task ahead. Go back into that darkness. Dr. Thorne, you barely escaped with your life. I know, I admitted, my exhaustion palpable. But Morag's journals, and the recordings on my phone, they are the only indisputable proof we have. The Ordo Serpentis won't rest until they've silenced me. And if I'm silenced, they're horrifying. Legacy continues. We have to retrieve them. We have to bring this truth to light, for all 28 brides, and for Morag, who died trying to expose them. The task was daunting, almost suicidal, but the alternative, letting this evil fester, allowing the Ordo Serpentis to continue their abominable experiments in the shadows, was unthinkable. The sun was now fully risen, painting the highland landscape in hues of gold and green, belying the profound darkness that lay hidden beneath. The fight for justice, for the recognition of their suffering, for the shattered lives, had just begun. But how would we get the attention of the world when the evidence was submerged in the very heart of the enemy's lair? The morning light, usually a comforting presence in Blackwood Dell, felt alien, exposing the fragility of our plan. Retrieving the journals from the submerged depths of the lock, from the very heart of the Ordo Serpentis' active lair, felt like a suicidal mission. But without them, without the meticulously recorded horrors of Morag's centuries-old investigation, and my own modern evidence, my story would forever be dismissed as the ramblings of a fevered academic. The justice for the 28 brides, and the silence of Morag, would remain elusive. Agnes, her face a mixture of fear and grim resolve, began sketching a detailed map of the moorland paths, highlighting the hidden trails, the ancient standing stones, and the forgotten shepherds' huts that could offer temporary refuge. She spoke of a distant cousin, a retired gamekeeper, who lived an isolated life on the fringes of a larger town. A man who still believed in the old ways, in truth, and could be trusted. He would be our initial point of contact outside the Dell, our conduit to the national authorities. We will wait, Agnes finally declared, her voice firm. Wait for the cover of deepest night. They will search for you, but eventually, they will grow complacent. Then, we go back, not to fight Dr. Thorne, but to reclaim what is theirs and expose what they have hidden. The day crawled by in a torturous haze of anticipation and strategizing. Agnes meticulously prepared a small pack with dry clothes, high-energy food, and a flask of strong whiskey. We discussed every possible contingency, every sound, every shadow. The weight of centuries of hidden evil pressed down on us, but so too did the fierce determination to finally shatter the silence as dusk bled into night, wrapping Blackwood Dell in its familiar cloak of shadows. Agnes and I moved. We slipped out of the rectory like ghosts, following the ancient paths she knew so intimately. The wind, a mournful whisper across the moor, seemed to carry the echoes of forgotten cries. We reached the fissure above the underground lock hours, later, guided by a pale, waning moon. The descent back into the cold, damp mouth of the grotto was terrifying. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of stagnant water. I could hear the faint, rhythmic lapping of the underground lock. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drum against the pervasive silence. Agnes waited at the grotto entrance, a small, stoic sentinel. "Be swift, Dr. Thorne," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rush of blood in my ears. "And be safe. The truth awaits." I plunged into the icy water again, the shock of the cold, just as jarring as before. This time, I swam with a clearer purpose, guiding myself towards the spot where I remembered dropping my backpack. The thought of those journals, the culmination of Morag's life's work, lying in the dark depths, spurred me on. The water was a suffocating blackness, but my new, more powerful flashlight, borrowed from Agnes, cut through the gloom. I found the backpack, miraculously snagged on a submerged rock outcrop. Its waterproofing, thank God, had held the weight of it, even underwater, was a physical reassurance. I hauled it to the surface, gasping for breath, the relief so profound. It almost buckled my knees. As I began my ascent back through the fissure, a faint rhythmic humming vibrated through the water beneath me. It was the distinct thrum of the cult's laboratory, deeper within the complex. They were still active. Their monstrous research continued. The realization reinforced the urgency of my mission. I scrambled out of the grotto, clutching the backpack, soaking wet and shivering, but triumphant. Agnes was there, her eyes alight with a mix of relief and renewed determination. We didn't speak, but a silent understanding passed between us. The evidence was secured. The journey back to Agnes's cousin was arduous, fraught with the constant paranoia of pursuit. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. But Agnes, with her unwavering local knowledge and silent strength, guided us through the labyrinthine moorland. By dawn, exhausted but resolute, we reached the secluded cottage of her cousin Hamish. Hamish, a man weathered by the highland elements, listened to our unbelievable tale with a quiet intensity. He examined the retrieved journals, now carefully dried, and listened to the chilling audio recordings from my phone with a grim, knowing expression. He was old enough to remember the lingering fear, the hushed whispers about the curse, and he saw the deeper, human horror in my words. It took time. It took Hamish's trusted contacts in a regional historical society, who, intrigued by Morag Macpherson's unique journals, agreed to discreetly bring the matter to the attention of a sympathetic, high-ranking official within the Scottish National Police. The sheer scale and historical depth of the criminal enterprise, coupled with the undeniable evidence of active unethical scientific practices and the terrifying discovery of the creature in the vault, forced their hand. The raid on St. Helena Church was swift, precise, and executed under the cover of a fabricated archaeological survey. Specialized units, operating with utmost secrecy, descended upon Blackwood Dell. The old church, the rectory, and the surrounding grounds were secured. The secret passage was breached. The underground complex was a living nightmare, exactly as I had described. The laboratory, the operating table, the anatomical diagrams, and the instruments, all were meticulously documented. And in the vault, the skeletal creature, the living embodiment of the Ordo Serpentis's depravity, was found. Its existence was a profound, horrifying testament to the extent of their experiments. It was gently, reverently, taken into specialized care. Several individuals, including the lead figure who had confronted me, were apprehended within the complex. They were not the elderly, robed figures one might expect of an ancient cult. They were modern men and women, meticulously organized, highly educated, and terrifyingly detached. The Ordo Serpentis, it turned out, had evolved, adapting its methods. Its members drawn from influential families with a disturbing intergenerational dedication to their inquiry. Their true names, their connections, remained largely concealed, but their operation was undeniably shattered. The judicial process that followed was long, complex, and shrouded in national security classifications. The public explanation was vague, citing historical criminal activity and unlicensed medical practices. The full, grotesque truth of the essence of fear experiments, of the decades of kidnapped brides, was deemed too horrific, too destabilizing, for widespread public consumption. The institution, in its wisdom, chose internal concealment over societal upheaval. St. Helena Church was sealed, declared a site of historical significance and scientific interest. its true nature remaining a dark secret. The vault, with its chilling records, became a secure, classified archive. The creature, a silent survivor, was taken to a remote, secure facility, its existence a testament to the darkest depths of human depravity. Blackwood Dell slowly began to heal, though the shadow of the curse would forever linger, subtly transformed from supernatural dread to an unspoken human horror. The community never truly learned the full extent of what lay beneath their feet, but a palpable sense of tension lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism. The Ordo Serpentis, or at least its active members, faced judicial justice, though the true scope of their influence and the full extent of their historical crimes remained buried. There was no grand public reckoning for the 28 brides. Their memory and mirages lived on, primarily through my work. Now published under a pseudonym, its true, classified details hinted at through the veil of historical fiction. The story of the 28 brides of St. Helena Church, and the curse that masked a monstrous human enterprise, is a chilling reminder of the dark side of humanity. It teaches us that evil often hides not in the supernatural, but in the calculated cruelty of those who seek power, control, or a perverse understanding at any cost. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of institutional secrecy and the lasting impact of buried history. So, dear reader, I ask you, when does a legend cease to be folklore and become a cover-up? How many hidden evils still fester beneath the seemingly placid surface of our world, masked by convenient explanations? And what price are we willing to pay? What truths are we willing to ignore for the sake of perceived stability? The echoes of St. Helena still whisper, reminding us that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not lurking in the shadows, but are found in the most hallowed of places, carrying out their depravity in the cold light of day. Join our community to share your thoughts, your own investigations, and help us shine a light on the hidden corners of history.